So we finished the last session by looking at how we could actually restructure the organization and trying to figure out how many roles are we potentially replacing. And the way we framed it is we're not replacing FTE, we're replacing the capacity and actually increasing the ability for us to do alternative tasks. And so what we're going to do now is actually go into how do we actually do that reallocation and how do we think about reassigning the roles based on the team that we already have. And again, we're using this small team of 5 people in a recruiting function to really illustrate how we could potentially go through this. We're going to go through step by step the process, and I'm going to share all of the prompts and everything that you need to get going. So there's a few things that you'll find in the download pack. You'll find the updated assignment Excel sheet. So in here, you'll see the tabs that we had from last time. I've already done it ahead of time because it does take a while for Claude for Excel to actually go through the process. But you can do this in real time, work on either the sample data that you can download from the site, or you can potentially do it with real data as long as you're not sending anything that's confidential or PII and that's going to put you into any kind of legal hot water. Inside the download file, you'll find a prompt pack, and it's going to look like this. You actually go through and I'll tell you the 4 stages that we're going to cover, the 4 rules that we're going to cover, and how we're going to strip any proxy variables which could potentially bias as we go through the process. The reason that we're doing this is there's a lot of legal regulation that's in place or coming into place to protect job seekers and employees from bias based on companies overusing AI in this process. So we really want to make sure that we're not increasing the bias in the process. We actually want to strip as much of it out as possible. So as we go through, we're going to make a few tweaks. One caveat, I'm not a lawyer, so if you do have any legal questions, please direct them to someone on your legal team or to an external attorney. The workflow we're going to go through is take this workbook, and then we're going to build out the profiles based on what we've reallocated in the last episode with the retasking of the roles. And then we're going to move through how do we actually identify who goes into which role and the actual transition criteria that we're going to follow for that. I want you to take a look at this AI and people decisions one-pager. It's at the beginning of the prompt pack, but if you want to forward this on to people in your team, if you want to use this and create your own version, this is just something I mocked up just to show some of the issues that you want to consider when you're going through using AI to make any decisions based on people data, whether that is hiring or termination or promotions. It's really important that you understand what's happening in the process, and it's why I really advocate for you either understanding the vendor that you're using or doing this yourself and actually understand the decisions you're making, so you're not actually fully automating the process, but you're using it as a mechanistic assistance to help you make better decisions. Okay, so with that being said, if you don't have access to this already, take a look at the resources section on Meander Talent Academy. Just click over to resources. All the recent videos I just leave as featured in the top row. You should be able to find it. The last 2 episodes already have their resources filled out in the top row here. The task automation and the role rebuild prompt pack. You'll be able to go in there. We actually link directly to the YouTube video in here as well. So if you want to watch it through the site, you can do that. I've started to also create these lessons in more digestible formats. This kind of last session that we looked at, I've actually created it into a blog post that you can go through, and you can see if you review information a little bit better through written communication, you can look here and you can actually find the link. Some people were complaining that it was kind of hard to find the right resource. You can actually just click directly here and it's going to take you through to... Okay, so let's dig into it. We're going to go through these prompts one by one, and we're going to start off by looking at our task inventory. And what we're going to do is take a look through everyone's profile and then try and figure out for each individual what tasks they currently own, and then how do we actually think about remixing them. So if I load up Claude for Excel, and you can do this in any tool as long as you're clear to do it. I really like Claude for Excel because it keeps everything in kind of one page. You can see I went through the process, but what I actually came up with was capability profiles here. So it looked at the task inventory, it tried to figure out based on that task inventory and the 5-person team, how are those tasks actually currently distributed. Now, one thing to call out is that we didn't actually have the roster anywhere in here. All I've done is said we've got 5 people, we've got 3 recruiters, a TA lead and a coordinator. So assume that the 3 TA recruiters are actually doing the same kind of role. And that's what I did here. And the other thing that I've scoped is that we don't include names here. So as we're going through the selection process, we don't want to be able to identify the actual individual. We actually want to look at objective evidence throughout this whole process so that we're making objective decisions on what we're actually going to do moving forward. We're not actually biasing based on how well we know the person or anything unconscious that may bubble up, like gender, race, background, or anything like that. So let's keep it very objective. And here's our task inventory. We can look at the coordinator, and then the 3 recruiters each get the same one. And then we have the TA lead as well. And you can see all it's done here is taken the task that we outlined in the task inventory and actually read across the quadrant to figure out how many hours per month does this person now need in order to deliver against the role that we have scoped in this new world. There's a few things at the bottom here that we've covered. We're not going to use any of these adaptability or learning agility or culture fit language. That's maybe something that you want to do qualitatively as you assess people going through the process. A lot of this is very subjective and could really impart a lot of bias in the process. But we'll take a quick look at the first one, because that's where we're going to see the biggest impact to this AI and automation process. So a coordinator, actually most of their roles have fell into the quadrant of automate now, which is scheduling and reminder emails, data entry, job posting, compliance. We did put background check coordination in there as a redesign later, so that's not something we want to completely automate now. But because it's mostly a coordination exercise, there is a lot of room potentially to automate that process. But given the legal implications of making sure the background check is done correctly, we actually want a human oversight for that. So we do want to keep that person in the loop. But what you can see here is that as we go through the hours that we're assigning to this individual, 175 of those monthly hours are now being automated, with 15 hours per month as redesign later. This means that actually a lot of the work they're doing right now is going to go away. So then what do we do when we're thinking about role reassignment? And the mix is quite a good example for this use case, where the recruiters are actually using a lot of Copilot as they go through different parts of the process. And a lot of the things I teach is to actually to teach people how to use Copilots more and more to automate some of the processes and increase their own personal capacity. But what we've done is assume that each of the recruiters is doing the same job, and so you'll see those match. And then, as I said, the TA lead is pretty much all human core work. What this doesn't include is some of their own kind of personal admin. We've got some videos on how to think about automating your personal admin so you can spend more time doing one-on-ones and stakeholder management and different kind of vendor decision making and things like that, which are really important for the TA lead to be able to spend time doing. Okay, so we've got these capability profiles now. We don't have any names in, which is perfect. So now let's move forward and try and figure out how do we actually assign these roles to the capability profiles that we have determined, and then think about these kind of new roles that we've considered as we think about role clustering. So if we look at the role clustering tab, what we've said is that there are now 3 new roles, 5 total headcount again, and the roles have actually shifted in that we have a talent ops and pipeline QA, 3 AI augmented recruiter roles, and then 1 which is more of a strategic TA lead. And we'll see how they actually are building out from what we have determined in the past as we start to think about who we're going to assign and how the roles actually change with the transition plan. So we're not going to come to that just yet, because one of the things that I want to take a brief pause and look at before we go into the assignment matrix is the Mobley versus Workday case. This case is ongoing, so depending on when you watch this, there may be things that have changed. But as I was looking through one of the documents, one thing that I thought was important just to highlight is that the reason this is so interesting is that we're assuming that software is no longer acting as just a mechanistic tool like I'm using kind of Excel, but actually Workday itself as a software provider is acting as an agent, and it's actually doing some of the work that would traditionally be done by an employer. And that's a really interesting distinction to make, because it implies that software is actually making decisions for you. And so a lot of what we want to think about as we're going through this process is how are we using AI? And are we actually using it to make a decision or to actually give us better information so that we can make more effective decisions ourselves? And then how defendable is that? Should we actually have to fight a bias case to stand behind the work that we've done and honestly say that we believe that what we've done is in the best interest of the organization and it's kind of legally grounded in a framework that we would potentially want to use moving forward? Some of the other elements that were included in this include things like comparing the use of Excel Excel to prepare your taxes with actually using a tax prep agency, and to what extent does AI become your tax prep. But without going too much off topic, I just want to call out that if you're not already familiar with this case, and actually a lot of the AI bias regulation that is now being kind of approved and released and is only going to get more and more stringent over time, make sure that you fully understand what you're doing as you're going through this process, because there's a recent news article where a large tech company actually used AI to select who it was going to let go in a reduction in force, and they're going to get into a lot of trouble because of that. So you don't want to wind up in that situation, but you do want to be able to use AI to actually help you make more informed decisions. All right, so we'll kind of move ahead to the next prompt, which is building the assignment matrix. So you can see here that we've asked it to create a new tab. It's gone through the capability profiles that we determined and actually look at the individuals that we have in those positions. Now, this is interesting because the way that we have built this out is that we've got 5 roles, 3 of which are the same. And so we're not actually distinguishing between the 3 middle roles. But what it does do is actually give us a really interesting analysis of the kind of current role and what that role profile is required to do, and then the rebuilt role and what that role profile is required to do. And then we're actually comparing the tasks from one to another and trying to determine, based on the original profile, is this new profile an easy fit to transition that person across? Or is it going to be more of a stretch where we actually have to think about retraining? Or is there actually like no clean transfer across as we're going through that process? There's actually 2 stages to this, where initially we're going to run this prompt, which is telling you to create an assignment for fit, stretch, or no clean seat, and cite the specific task. So we're not going to go based on what we think this person is going to be able to learn or achieve or potential or anything like that. It's really just looking at, given the task that this person does currently and the tasks that are going to be needed in the future, can this person actually fit into this role? And so you can see here that we've actually really broken out a lot of it. I'm going to kill the Excel tab here so that we can see and just go through one line here. So looking at our coordinator, and this is the one that's going to be most impacted by AI. And the rebuilt role is talent ops and pipeline QA, which is, it's a natural move if we're thinking about what is the role currently, what is the role going to be in the future, and how many seats do we have. And we take the task that they're currently doing, we look at where we don't have any evidence, and then we're going to take a look at the basis for the absence. So what we're actually taking a look at here is, do we have an absence of evidence that the person can't do the role, or do we have evidence that the person can't do the role? And the absence of evidence means that we actually don't know if the person can do the role or not. If we have evidence that the person's tried to do this task in the past and not been able to achieve it, then that's good enough to know that that person is probably going to struggle if we move them into that role. But if they've never had an opportunity to do it, then there's an opportunity to actually stretch them and get them into the position. And so we go through each of these, moving the coordinator into a recruiter role. This has never been allocated. So in this case, we're saying no clean C. But when we're thinking about kind of retraining and reskilling, we've got to look at the roles and the differences between the roles. So we've got to draw a line somewhere. You can see, recruiter fits naturally into an AI augmented recruiter. Same with the TA lead will fit naturally into the TA lead strategic role. But what we do once we've gone through this initial run through is then do a gap analysis. So this is going to take a look at, for all of the kind of differences in the roles, can we actually determine how we could potentially fill that gap? So this coordinator into talent ops pipeline, we're looking at a role and we're looking at, this is now a stretch opportunity. Do we want to potentially invest in this individual in order to build them into that role? And is that, a positive ROI as we're thinking about kind of restructuring, given how expensive it is to terminate someone and then rehire a new person to fill that profile? If we can actually repurpose that individual and retrain them, we're actually going to solve a lot of challenges very quickly, and ethically it's the right thing to do at this point. So AI has gone through this whole process and tried to figure out, is there an observable skill gap that this person could fill? What do we need to do in order to get them to kind of train up and do it? And then, is this an individual gap? Is it organizational? Can we actually kind of change something? You can go through all this. We're not going to go through line by line, but it's really just showing, how do we think about this transition process, and can we actually kind of implement these new processes to increase the overall capability of the team by investing in training, in buying new capabilities, potentially in additional software. And that's where we're going to go through this process. And so what we've actually done is then compiled all this together to look at the actual required path. So to go from a TA, the coordinator, to an augmented recruiter, it's going to take 4 to 6 quarters, it's a year to year and a half, and it's actually going to be quite a kind of a laborious process. To go from coordinator to TA lead is 6+ quarters. This is, obviously a big leap, and maybe it's not something that this individual is going to want to go through. To go from a TA lead into a talent ops role is 1 to 2 quarters. The same is stretch. And actually, one thing that I'm going to show you the adversarial prompt that we always use to try and make sure that we are actually making the right decisions. But initially, when the AI had gone through this process and assessed everyone, it looked at the TA lead and said, this TA lead is actually not going to be equipped to take on the talent ops and pipeline QA role, looking at only observable evidence of what they're doing in their current role. So this shows you where the human judgment over the top is going to be most helpful as you're thinking through this. And so these are the kind of required paths that we might want to go through, where there's a no clean seat. Now the no clean seat was kind of switched out for the TA lead into these roles, because now it's considered to be a stretch. So the final part of this stage of the process to actually create this argument. Now we're not going to go through line by line because there's a lot going on here, but if I show you the prompt that we've used here, is we've asked Claude Code to argue against the matrix that it just created. And here it's going through and it's giving us back information of where it has potentially found errors in its argument. And so we'll go through here and go through the gap analysis, now argue against. And it's actually giving us traits scored with no evidence, for instance, current state gap treated as a ceiling. So we assume that if you can't do it, then there's no clean seat, whereas there's actually always a path to get someone there. It's just that path might not be viable in the term that we're actually looking at. And so this is a really interesting approach to take. And you could also then spend a bit of time then auditing the feedback that you get and actually going back and asking question after question to try not to get to the root cause of why a decision was made, so that the decision then becomes yours, supported by AI, and not just AI's decision on whether someone can or can't do a role. So we've gone through the process, we've determined what potential roles we have, who's going to fit in what role in the future. And if we go back to the top, having gone through the adversarial audit, this is the table that I got. So for each of the profiles, remember, profile 1 is the coordinator, 2 through 4 is the recruiter, 5 is the TA lead. We can see that the 3 recruiters are actually fit very cleanly into this new recruiter role that we've created. TA lead fits cleanly into the strategic role. Now, that's not to say there's going to be no retraining, because there is actually additional skills that are required, and we'll come to those in a few minutes. But the coordinator role, there's actually no clean seat for them to go into in these two, actually, because they've also partially been filled by these other individuals. And this new talent ops and pipeline QA role is actually a stretch for them. So we're going to have to really think about how do we invest in this individual and get them into the place where they can actually kind of grow into that role there. And that's where the transition wave plan comes in. And so the final part of this is to actually go through a new tab, and we're going to sequence from the corrected matrix into these waves. And we want kind of like really a roadmap for how we're going to go through this whole transition and get people into the right seat. So if we go into the transition wave plan, you can see how this has been built out. You can see we've got waves starting at 0 and they kind of go all the way down. So initially, we're actually not doing anything to anyone. We're just going to spend a quarter actually looking at the automation processes that we have identified as going through and trying to determine, can we actually automate those processes, or are they actually false positives where we actually realize that these are not automatable? We've actually, taken a look and gathered evidence on what can actually be automated initially. The next wave is to actually look at this coordinator role and try and figure out, can we actually get this coordinator to do the role of this new talent ops and pipeline QA? And this is we're assigning 1 to 2 quarters for this. And we actually have very clear gates on how we're going to measure success here. So we take a 50 application sample. Do we see the shortlist that this individual is making actually match what a recruiter is going to say? And is that success rate above 90%? If so, we actually know that this individual is able to use the tools that they have beyond what they did with the coordinator and actually support the recruiters in this new world. And you kind of keep going down with this, and how are we going to train the recruiters into this new AI augmented role? What I think is very interesting is the lead. How do you actually move the TA lead into a more strategic role? and how do we actually log hours so that we automate some of their work that initially wasn't planned to be automated, such that they can actually now start to take on more of a workforce planning role and actually lean in a little bit more on strategic decision making, which is where I think a lot of TA leaders want to go moving forward. And AI automating some of the more routine tasks is a really good way to get there. But you can see none of this is kind of rushing through the process. We're going through, we're setting up clear success criteria, we're setting up a clear experiment, and we're going to determine whether this is actually going to work moving forward. So when we think about anything that's kind of legal or compliance or anything that's going to have a brand implication to the business is something that you probably still want a lot of human oversight on, even if you could automate. So the big takeaway for episode 1 is even if you can automate something, you shouldn't necessarily default to automating it. Episode 2, we actually looked at how do we actually then think about the FTE that we're actually saving across an organization, and how do we actually measure that more accurately and think about how we're going to redistribute that potentially. So we started with 1.4 FTE. We then realized that actually there's going to be additional work that's required through the automation process to actually create more oversight. So that actually decreased it. And then when we actually pressure tested the assumptions we'd made, we decreased it even further. So had we initially taken that first number and removed that from our capacity plan, we'd be drastically under capacity and then have to scramble to rehire. And the recruiting team trying to hire before it recruits is kind of a really kind of challenging environment to be in. And so episode 2 was really helpful. Episode 3, we've now taken a look at how do we actually move people around in the organization and really think through what is the like stage transition rather than just making a big leap and going from A to B. And then really, as we're thinking about this and using AI to support the decision making, how do we ensure that we're not going to create any legal issues and ethical violations because we've made decisions, or we've let AI make decisions for us when there's a very clear issue at play that we may have overlooked. So they're the kind of three main topics we've covered so far. Next, we're actually going to go into how do you make this a routine, ongoing process so that this is not just a one and done, but as models change, as tools get better, you're actually constantly reviewing and constantly retraining your organization so that you stay agile and ahead of this. So if you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe. Drop any comments below. Really appreciate hearing anything that you find interesting. If you do want to go a little bit further, we do have our new Academy AI and HR Accelerator program. We're publishing more and more modules over the course of the summer. The first 2 are live. The module 3 is in production. That's going to go out very soon. The next one is actually, I think a lot of people are interested in this, build your own AI recruiting agent. We're going to get a little bit deeper on that. And then at the end of it, you're going to have SHRM PDC credits and then also a certificate from us to say that you've actually qualified in this accelerator. When you do join, you get the accelerator, but you also get all of the legacy courses as well. We also have new tools through different case methodologies that might be interesting if you're actually trying to go a little bit deeper and really learn this subject in a way that you can't just by watching a video. So hope that was helpful. I look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.